The park was his territory, every trail, every hiding spot, every place where danger could lurk unseen. Parents trusted him to keep their children safe during family picnics and weekend visits. What they didn't know was that he'd been trained to identify threats that most people would never notice until it was too late. Welcome to Silent Heroes. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden protection and extraordinary vigilance, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Riverside Memorial Park covered 800 acres of rolling hills, wooded trails, and open meadows that served as the heart of the community's recreational life. Every weekend, thousands of families gathered for birthday parties, school picnics, and quiet afternoons where children could play safely while parents relaxed in an environment that felt completely secure from the dangers of urban life. At the park's visitor center, 62-year-old Robert Martinez adjusted his ranger hat and checked his radio before beginning his morning patrol of the grounds. For 15 years, Robert had been the face of park security, the friendly ranger who helped lost children find their parents, assisted elderly visitors with directions, and maintained the hiking trails that drew outdoor enthusiasts from across the region. To the thousands of families who visited Riverside Memorial Park, Robert was exactly what he appeared to be, a dedicated civil servant who'd found peaceful work maintaining a beautiful public space. He was approachable without being intrusive, helpful without being overwhelming, and always seemed to appear whenever visitors needed assistance or guidance. But Robert Martinez wasn't just a park ranger. He was Gunnery Sergeant Robert Martinez, United States Marine Corps, retired, with 22 years of service that had included 3 combat deployments and specialized training as a scout sniper. He'd spent over 2 decades learning to read terrain, identify threats, and protect people from dangers they never saw coming. Robert's military career had ended with an honorable discharge following an injury in Afghanistan that left him with limited mobility in his left shoulder and chronic pain that made active duty impossible. The Marine Corps had offered desk assignments and training positions, but Robert needed something that would allow him to serve his community while using skills that had become fundamental to his identity during 2 decades of military service. Riverside Memorial Park had provided the perfect transition from military to civilian service. The park's 800 acres required constant surveillance to ensure visitor safety, wildlife management, and security monitoring that drew on exactly the kind of observational skills that Robert had developed during years of reconnaissance operations. But Robert's approach to park security went far beyond standard ranger duties. He'd mentally mapped every trail, identified every potential hiding spot, and established observation points that would allow him to monitor the entire facility with a systematic precision that had once been used to protect military installations from enemy infiltration. Robert knew which visitors came to the park regularly and which ones were first-time guests. He could identify parents who were attentive to their children and parents who were distracted by phones or conversations. He recognized the difference between teenage groups who were just hanging out and groups that might be planning trouble. Most importantly, he developed an instinct for spotting adults whose interest in children seemed inappropriate or predatory. For 15 years, Robert's vigilance had prevented dozens of incidents that could have traumatized families and damaged the park's reputation as a safe community gathering place. Lost children were reunited with parents before panic could set in. Suspicious individuals were approached and questioned before they could act on whatever intentions had brought them to areas where children played unsupervised. Potential accidents were avoided through proactive maintenance and safety monitoring. The parents who visited Riverside Memorial Park had no idea that their children's safety depended on a former Marine Scout sniper who treated playground security with the same systematic approach he'd once used to protect American soldiers from insurgent attacks. But this Saturday morning was different. This morning, Robert noticed something that made 22 years of military training sound alarms that couldn't be ignored. At 10:30 a.m., during the peak of weekend family activities, Robert observed 2 men conducting what appeared to be systematic reconnaissance of the children's playground area. They weren't parents. Robert knew all the regular families by sight after 15 years, and these men had no children with them. They weren't maintenance workers or park employees. Robert would have been notified in advance of any scheduled work in that section of the park. The men were methodically observing the playground from different vantage points, taking note of entrance and exit points, studying the layout of equipment and benches, and paying particular attention to children who were playing without close parental supervision. Their behavior indicated careful planning rather than casual observation, and their positioning suggested coordination between two people who were working together toward a specific objective. Robert had seen identical reconnaissance patterns during his military service, the kind of systematic surveillance that preceded targeted operations against specific individuals or strategic locations. But this surveillance was taking place in a children's playground during peak family activity hours, which meant that whatever these men were planning likely involved American children as potential targets. The first suspect was approximately 35 years old, athletic build, wearing casual clothing that was too warm for the weather, possibly concealing equipment or weapons. He carried a small backpack and had positioned himself near the park's main entrance where he could monitor families arriving and leaving while remaining inconspicuous among other adult visitors. The second suspect was older, perhaps 45, with a kind of situational awareness that suggested military or law enforcement training. He'd positioned himself near the playground's wooded perimeter where he could observe children who wandered away from their families while having quick access to hiking trails that could serve as escape routes. Both men were conducting textbook surveillance, systematic, professional, and coordinated. They maintained visual contact with each other through subtle hand signals, rotated positions to avoid attracting attention from park security, and focused their observation on specific types of targets rather than general park activities. Robert activated his emergency radio and contacted the park security office while moving to a position that would allow him to maintain visual contact with both suspects without alerting them to his presence. 22 years of scout sniper training had taught him how to observe dangerous people without being detected, but it had also taught him how to identify the moment when passive surveillance needed to transition to active intervention. Security. This is Ranger Martinez. I have eyes on two suspicious individuals conducting what appears to be reconnaissance of playground area. Adult males, coordinated movement, no children present. Requesting backup and law enforcement notification. The response from park security was immediate but inadequate. Copy, Ranger Martinez. We'll send additional personnel to your location. ETA approximately 10 minutes. Robert knew that 10 minutes was an eternity in a situation involving potential child abduction. If these men were planning to take a child, they would act quickly and be gone before backup could arrive. Park security consisted of 2 additional rangers who had no military training and would be completely unprepared for dealing with professional kidnappers. Through his binoculars, Robert continued monitoring the suspects while mentally calculating tactical options. The playground area contained approximately 50 children ranging in age from toddlers to teenagers, along with about 30 adults who were mostly focused on their own families rather than potential threats from strangers. If the situation escalated into an abduction attempt, Robert would need to protect potential victims while minimizing risk to innocent bystanders. The playground's layout provided limited cover and multiple escape routes that would favor suspects who had conducted advanced reconnaissance of the area. At 10:47 a.m., Robert observed both suspects checking their watches and exchanging subtle hand signals that indicated transition from surveillance to operational phase. Whatever they were planning was about to happen, and Robert was the only person in position to prevent it. That's when he saw the target they'd selected. Near the playground's eastern edge, a 7-year-old girl with blonde hair had wandered away from her family's picnic table to chase a butterfly toward the park's wooded perimeter. She was approximately 50 yards from her parents, who were busy setting up lunch and hadn't noticed their daughter moving toward an area where she could be isolated from potential help. The older suspect began moving casually toward the girl's position, while the younger suspect positioned himself to block the line of sight between the child and her family. They were executing a textbook abduction: isolate the target, create distraction, and extract quickly through pre-planned escape routes. Robert had approximately 30 seconds to prevent a child abduction that would traumatize an entire community and destroy a family forever. 30 seconds to decide whether to wait for backup that wouldn't arrive in time or take direct action against 2 suspects who might be armed and were definitely prepared to use violence to complete their mission. Robert Martinez, peaceful park ranger, was about to become Gunnery Sergeant Martinez one final time. Robert moved through the park's wooded perimeter with the silent precision that had once been used to approach enemy positions in Afghanistan. 22 years of scout sniper training allowed him to cover ground quickly while remaining invisible to the suspects who were focused on their target. The 7-year-old girl, completely unaware of the danger approaching her, continued chasing the butterfly toward a cluster of trees that would provide perfect concealment for an abduction. Her parents remained at their picnic table, distracted by food preparation and conversation with other family members. The older suspect was now within 10 feet of the child, moving with the casual confidence of someone who'd done this before. He carried a small cloth in his left hand, likely containing chloroform or another sedative that would incapacitate the girl quickly and quietly. His partner had positioned himself to block any view of the abduction from the playground area. Robert reached a position behind a large oak tree that provided cover while giving him clear line of sight to both suspects and the potential victim. From this position, he could intervene immediately if the situation escalated while maintaining the element of surprise that would be his only tactical advantage against two potentially armed kidnappers. "Security, this is Martinez," Robert whispered into his radio. "Suspects are moving toward target. Child in immediate danger. I'm moving to intercept." "Negative, Martinez. Wait for backup. Do not engage suspects alone." But Robert knew that waiting for backup meant watching a 7-year-old girl disappear forever. Some situations required immediate action regardless of protocol or personal safety. The older suspect approached the child with a friendly smile, speaking in a calm voice designed to avoid triggering fear or resistance. "Hi there, sweetie. That's a beautiful butterfly you're chasing. I saw where it landed. Would you like me to show you?" The girl looked up at the stranger with the trusting innocence that made children easy targets for predators. "It's really pretty. Where did it go?" "Just over here, behind these trees. Your parents said it was okay for you to come look." It was a classic abduction technique, using the child's trust and curiosity while falsely invoking parental permission to overcome natural caution. The girl began following the suspect toward the wooded area where his partner was waiting to assist with the kidnapping. Robert had run out of time for surveillance and backup. The child was about to be taken into an area where she would be completely isolated from help, and once the abduction was complete, finding her would become a matter for federal investigators rather than immediate rescue. Robert emerged from behind the oak tree and approached the suspects with his ranger identification clearly visible but his hand positioned near the concealed weapon he'd been authorized to carry based on his military training. "Excuse me, sir," Robert called out in the friendly voice he'd used for 15 years of helping park visitors. "I'm Ranger Martinez. Is everything okay over here?" The older suspect turned toward Robert with practiced calm, but his eyes carried the kind of alertness that belonged to people who were prepared for violent confrontation. "Everything's fine, officer. Just helping this little girl find her parents." "That's interesting," Robert replied, moving closer while positioning himself between the suspects and their escape routes. "Because I can see her parents right over there at the picnic table, and they seem to be looking for her." The girl looked confused, glancing between Robert and the stranger who'd been leading her away from safety. "But he said my mommy and daddy said it was okay." "I think there might be some confusion," Robert said, maintaining his friendly ranger persona while calculating distances and tactical positions. "Why don't we all walk back together and make sure everyone knows where you are?" The younger suspect, who had been blocking sight lines from the playground, began moving toward Robert's position. His hand was moving toward something concealed under his jacket, either a weapon or communication device that would alert additional team members to the compromised operation. Robert realized that this wasn't just an opportunistic child abduction attempt. These were professionals who had backup plans, communication systems, and enough resources to conduct systematic surveillance of public facilities. They were part of an organization that specialized in kidnapping children, which meant that failing to stop them here would put other children in danger at other locations. "Sir, I need to ask you to keep your hands where I can see them," Robert said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that belonged to someone who'd commanded Marines in combat situations. The older suspect's expression changed from friendly pretense to cold calculation. He'd recognized that the park ranger wasn't going to be intimidated or distracted from protecting the child. "Officer, I think you're misunderstanding the situation," the suspect said while subtly signaling his partner. "This little girl was lost, and we were just trying to help her find her family." "The situation I understand," Robert replied, "is that you've been conducting surveillance of this playground for the past 20 minutes, you approached a child who wasn't lost, and you're trying to separate her from her family using false information." The moment of pretense was over. Both suspects now understood that their operation had been compromised by someone who'd been watching them with the same professional attention they'd been using to plan their crime. The younger suspect made the first move, reaching for the weapon concealed under his jacket while positioning himself to flank Robert's position. But 22 years of military training had prepared Robert for exactly this kind of multi-target engagement in an environment filled with innocent civilians. Robert's response was immediate and precise. He drew his concealed service weapon while simultaneously pushing the 7-year-old girl behind the oak tree that would provide cover from both suspects. His movement was fluid and professional, the kind of tactical precision that separated trained operators from ordinary security personnel. "Get down and stay behind the tree," Robert commanded the girl, who was now crying but obeying without question. Her safety was his primary objective, but he also needed to prevent the suspects from escaping to target other children at other locations. The older suspect abandoned all pretense of being a helpful citizen and revealed the chloroform-soaked cloth he'd been preparing to use on the child. "You made a big mistake, old man. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Former Marine Scout sniper with 22 years of service," Robert replied calmly while maintaining visual contact with both suspects. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Child traffickers who picked the wrong park on the wrong day." The younger suspect had his weapon partially drawn but hesitated when he realized that Robert wasn't an ordinary security guard reacting out of panic. Robert's stance, weapon discipline, and tactical awareness indicated professional training that would make this confrontation significantly more dangerous than they'd anticipated. "This doesn't have to end badly for anyone," the older suspect said, trying to regain control of a situation that had gone completely wrong. "Walk away now, and nobody gets hurt. We'll leave the kid and find another opportunity." "The opportunity you're going to find," Robert said, "is a federal prison cell where child traffickers spend the rest of their lives. Assuming you survive the next 60 seconds. Through his radio earpiece, Robert could hear park security and law enforcement units responding to his emergency call, but they were still several minutes away from his location. The playground area was beginning to empty as other parents noticed the confrontation and moved their children to safer areas. But the suspects weren't planning to wait for law enforcement arrival. The younger suspect completed his weapon draw and aimed at Robert's center mass while the older suspect moved toward the girl's hiding place behind the oak tree. Robert had trained for this exact scenario during years of close protection operations, multiple armed threats with innocent civilians in the line of fire. The engagement required precision that would eliminate both threats without allowing either suspect to harm the child or escape to continue their criminal operations elsewhere. The first shot disabled the younger suspect's weapon hand before he could fire, while Robert's tactical movement put him in position to engage the second target without risking ricochets that could endanger the child. The older suspect attempted to use the girl as a human shield, grabbing her arm while holding the chloroform cloth near her face. "Back off or the kid dies right here." It was the threat Robert had been expecting, the moment when professional kidnappers would use their intended victim as leverage to escape capture. But Robert had dealt with hostage situations in combat zones where the stakes were life and death and the margins for error were measured in milliseconds. "Let her go and you walk away," Robert said calmly. "Hurt her and you don't." The suspect pressed the chloroform cloth closer to the girl's face while backing toward his planned escape route. "I'll kill her before I let you stop this operation. There are others like us, and we'll get her eventually anyway." It was exactly the wrong thing to say to someone who'd spent 2 decades protecting innocent people from predators who thought their evil was inevitable. Robert's final shot as a scout sniper was the most important he'd ever made, precise enough to eliminate a threat holding a child hostage while ensuring that no harm came to an innocent 7-year-old who'd only wanted to chase butterflies in a place that was supposed to be safe. The engagement was over in less than 10 seconds, but it ended a child trafficking operation that had been targeting parks and public facilities across 3 states. Law enforcement would later discover that the suspects were part of an international network that specialized in kidnapping American children for overseas buyers. Robert knelt beside the crying girl, speaking in the same gentle voice he'd used to help lost children for 15 years. "It's okay now. You're safe. Let's go find your mommy and daddy." As they walked back toward the playground where frantic parents were searching for their daughter, Robert realized that his 15 years as a peaceful park ranger had been preparation for this moment. The chance to use everything he'd learned about protecting people to save one child from a fate that would have destroyed her family forever. 20 minutes later, Riverside Memorial Park was swarming with federal agents, local law enforcement, and emergency medical personnel responding to what the FBI would later classify as a successful interdiction of an international child trafficking operation. Robert sat on a park bench, still wearing his ranger uniform, giving his statement to Agent Sarah Williams from the FBI's Crimes Against Children Unit. Mr. Martinez, your military record shows specialized training in reconnaissance and precision shooting. Did that training influence your response to today's situation? Robert looked across the playground where the 7-year-old girl was being reunited with her parents, who were crying with relief and gratitude. Agent Williams, I spent 22 years learning to protect people from threats they couldn't see coming. Today I got to use that training to protect one little girl who just wanted to chase butterflies. The suspects you neutralized were part of a network we've been investigating for 2 years. They've successfully abducted children from parks in Pennsylvania, Virginia, and North Carolina. Your intervention didn't just save one child, it ended an operation that was targeting families across the eastern seaboard. Robert nodded, understanding that the threat had been bigger than he'd realized during those crucial moments when action was more important than analysis. Are there other teams still operating? We're coordinating raids based on evidence recovered from the suspects' communication devices. Your actions today triggered a federal operation that should shut down their entire network. 3 months later, Robert stood in the FBI field office in Washington, D.C., receiving the FBI Director's Award for Public Service, recognition given to civilians who demonstrated exceptional courage in protecting others from federal crimes. But the ceremony felt less important than the letter he'd received from a 7-year-old girl who'd drawn a picture of butterflies and written, "Thank you for keeping me safe, Mr. Ranger." After the ceremony, Agent Williams approached him with an offer that had been discussed at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. Robert, we'd like to create a pilot program placing former military personnel in civilian positions at high-risk public facilities, parks, schools, community centers. Your experience shows that professional training can be invaluable for preventing crimes that traditional security measures might miss. Robert considered the offer while looking out at the federal building where agents worked every day to protect American families from threats most people never knew existed. Agent Williams, I've been protecting children at one park for 15 years. If you want to expand that protection to other parks where other children play, I'm interested. 6 months later, parents at Lakewood Community Park began noticing their new head of park security, a quiet man in his 60s who seemed unusually attentive to visitor safety and had an interesting background in maintaining secure environments for families and children. Robert had learned that some missions don't end with military discharge, they just find new ways to serve the same purpose of protecting innocent people from those who would harm them. The skills he developed as a Marine Scout sniper had found their perfect application as a guardian watching over children at play. The child trafficking network that had targeted Riverside Memorial Park was completely dismantled, with arrests made in 12 cities and evidence recovered that led to the rescue of children who'd been kidnapped from public facilities across the country. But for Robert, the real victory was smaller and more personal. One little girl who could chase butterflies safely because someone had been watching who knew how to recognize danger before it could strike. Riverside Memorial Park remained a safe haven for families, but now parents could visit with the confidence that came from knowing their children were protected by someone who'd spent his entire adult life learning to keep innocent people safe from those who saw them as targets. Robert's transition from military service to civilian protection had taken 15 years to complete, but on that Saturday morning when evil tried to steal innocence, every day of training and every year of vigilance had culminated in the moment when it mattered most. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone like Robert? Someone whose ordinary job was actually extraordinary preparation for protecting others? Someone who chose to keep serving their community long after their official duty ended? Share their story in the comments, because quiet guardians like that deserve to be remembered. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Silent Heroes. We're here to honor the people who watch over others without asking for recognition, who understand that real heroism happens when someone chooses to stand between innocence and evil. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the person maintaining your local park has spent decades learning to maintain much more than hiking trails and playground equipment. And sometimes that's exactly what keeps your family safe.